All right, welcome back for another video lesson, students. This is going to be lesson 4 of Unit 10, all about the War of 1812. Now, before we get into the actual war, I want to do a brief recap of what we had done in our previous lesson, lesson 3. Again, there were 3 causes to this war. First one being the impressment of U.S. sailors, where the British Navy would come in, capture a ship, and force American citizens into serving in the British Navy. The aiding of Native Americans in the frontier, specifically the Northwest Territory, talking about Tecumseh last time and how he is trying to build a coalition against the United States. And then finally, the interference of U.S. trade, talking about how Great Britain would be preventing of U.S. ships going to France to trade with them, and talking about our storyboard introduced last class, where the first event is the Orders of Consul, where Great Britain would force neutral countries to pay Great Britain the right to be able to trade with France, so interfering with their trade. So, a few stats, kind of compare the United States Navy and the British Navy. It is a well-trained Navy. Granted, we did talk about in lesson 1 how Thomas Jefferson reduced the size of the Navy. Here is one of the flagships, the USS Constitution. It's going to get its nickname of Old Ironsides in the upcoming battle, where literally in the fight, cannonballs will bounce off the hull of this ship, giving its name Ironsides. So in comparing these two, the U.S. Navy had about 12 warships compared to the British Navy that consisted of 500. Again, do the math. Doesn't look very good. In sheer number of sailors piloting these ships, 5,000 U.S. Navy sailors compared to the British Navy having 140. Again, advantage going to Great Britain. And then Marines, soldiers that are stationed on these boats who would then jump off ship and move towards land to attack the enemy. Only about 1,000 U.S. Marines versus 31,000 British Marines. So by sheer numbers, it doesn't look great, but we don't want to walk into this thinking that, the United States is woefully unprepared, minus the cuts to the Army and the Navy from Thomas Jefferson. So at first, it's kind of lopsided. A lot of back and forth in some early engagements here. I want to focus on the Battle of Detroit, Fort Detroit here in Michigan. At the Battle of Detroit, the Americans give up this fort without a fight. They're quickly surrounded by the British Army stationed in Canada, with the help of some Native Americans led by none other than Tecumseh, who is looking for vengeance upon William Henry Harrison and the destruction of Prophetstown from our last lesson. So some early battles not going in favor of the Americans. On the reverse side, there is some positives happening for the Americans. Here we have the Battle of Lake Erie, where the United States is able to defeat the British Navy that is stationed here in the Great Lakes. This is going to be a major naval victory for the Americans in this conflict. At the lead of the American Navy, we have Commodore Oliver Perry, who leads this victory for the United States Navy over the British, and he gets named the hero of Lake Erie. Another key victory that will eventually come in the early years of this war is the Battle of the Thames, where on land, fighting against mostly the Native Americans that are allying with the British near Detroit, will be William Henry Harrison again, leading the charge in this battle to victory. And key component to the Battle of the Thames, along with being a U.S. victory, we will then see the death of Tecumseh. Furthermore, in the South, here in Mississippi Territory, we're going to have what's called the Creek Wars, which go up until 1813, where a militia general by the name of Andrew Jackson from Tennessee will be marching south and going after Creek Indians who, similar to Tecumseh, are fighting and resisting against the United States expansion westward into this territory. This will culminate in the battle of, here on this map, Horseshoe Bend, where he's going to surround and trap a number of Creek Indians in literally a horseshoe-shaped fort along a river, where he'll eventually be able to defeat them and forcing the Native Americans in this region to give up several million acres of land to the United States. We see that spread out through here in southern Georgia and most of Alabama, future state of Alabama. However, by 1814, the tables are going to begin to turn against the United States. We've been mentioning before of how Great Britain has been in war with France since George Washington was president back in Unit 9. At this point, Napoleon is going to be defeated. With the end of fighting against Napoleon in France, this is going to allow Great Britain the ability to bring the bulk of its army and navy from Europe all the way to the United States and really begin to tighten the screws against the Americans. They have a three-pronged attack plan to try and knock out the Americans. And the first two are labeled here with an attack on Washington and then Baltimore up the Chesapeake Bay. At the Battle of Washington, D.C., the British are going to be able to capture the capital, where when they capture the capital of Washington, they're going to destroy much of the government buildings, including here the original White House. And part of the story here we've got is a picture of Dolley Madison, the First Lady, President Madison's wife, directing the staff to try and save as much of the artwork as possible, one of them including the original painting, portrait painting of George Washington. Following the capture and destruction of Washington, D.C., the British will then further sail north towards Baltimore, where they must first contend with Fort McHenry. It is relating to another person by the name of Francis Scott Key, and you see here the Star-Spangled Banner. This is when the British were trying to capture the fort to be able to enter the city of Baltimore, where they were bombing the fort all night long, only to find and see the American flag still standing the following morning. And was Francis Scott Key watching this from a ship in harbor is going to put pen to paper and record what he had seen that evening, which then again later becomes the Star-Spangled Banner. So if you've ever been to a sporting event of some kind, you hear this sang at every single one of them. And this is where that song comes from. Third prong attack by the British Army was at the port city of New Orleans. Their hope was to capture the city and be able to then control the Mississippi River and maybe also potentially take over the Louisiana territory from the United States. At this battle, the British Army had anywhere from 7,000 to 8,000 soldiers against anywhere from 4,500 to 5,500 American soldiers led by, again, General Andrew Jackson, the same general from the Creek War back in 1813. And at this battle, it does not go according to plan based on what the British were expecting, because we see here General Jackson is able to defeat the British in a matter of 30 minutes, where in total, he's only going to suffer about 13 dead and 30 wounded, versus the British Army is going to suffer almost 300 people dead and almost 1,300 wounded soldiers. So a very lopsided victory in the case of the Americans here at the Battle of New Orleans. This is going to become a major victory for the United States. Also, it's going to be solidifying Andrew Jackson as a national hero going forward. Now, around the same time as the events that led up to D.C., Baltimore, and New Orleans is something called the Hartford Convention, which also occurs in 1814. The Hartford Convention was held at Hartford, Connecticut, where a number of Federalists, New England Federalists, were meeting to discuss what to do about this war. Because at this point, this is before New Orleans, it still doesn't really look like it's going very well for the United States. So in this convention, what these Federalists had proposed is the discussion of seceding the northern states from the United States. Seceding meaning leave the country. These are the same Federalists that were opposed to war in the first place on Friday. We were talking about our causes. They were against it due to financial reasons. They felt that it was going to ruin their economy because they heavily traded with Britain. Some other unique things that they also discussed. They were talking about ending the 3/5 compromise of African slaves being counted towards representation, trying to take away some political power to the southern states. They proposed the idea that a president cannot come from the same state where his predecessor had come. This is coming from the sense that Virginia so far has dominated the presidency of the United States. We're on President Madison. This is president number 4. He's from Virginia. Every president so far has been from Virginia except for John Adams from Massachusetts. So kind of a harebrained idea on that one. But ultimately, one thing that sticks with this is their plan for seceding from the United States. They blame Madison for this war, a Democrat and Republican. They say that he is doing this specifically to help ruin the northern states that are dominated by the Federalist Party, because our friction that we've been developing since Hamilton and Jefferson in last unit fits into this. Well, the problem with the Hartford Convention was the timing. When they come to Washington with their proposed plan, the war is over. And this is after news is received of the victory that Andrew Jackson had at New Orleans. And so this looks very bad for the Federalist Party, as in the sense that it looks like they are not very patriotic, not very supportive of the country, and they further will lose authority, lose power as a political party going forward. This is going to be almost the final nail in their coffin, if you will, as an actual party. So as mentioned, the war is over. The war is over due to the Treaty of Ghent. This treaty ends the hostility between the United States and Great Britain, ending the War of 1812. But again, what's unique about this treaty is it's actually signed and agreed upon 2 to 3 weeks prior to the Battle of New Orleans. So technically the war is over when the Battle of New Orleans happens. So the victory that Andrew Jackson gets for the United States really doesn't matter. News of this treaty arrives in the United States after that battle has taken place. So many Americans feel like, oh, we've won because of this battle, when really the treaty happened before the battle. And again, the treaty happens before the Hartford Convention finally makes its decision and brings it to Washington to propose to the rest of the government. So again, all timing on this particular conflict is the biggest irony of what takes place. So with the end of this conflict, typically what happens is there's a winner, there's a loser. A winner gets something, a loser has to give up something. But in regards to the scope of what's happening at the end of the War of 1812 is basically nothing. Great Britain doesn't gain new land. The United States doesn't lose any land or gain any land. So all things stay the same as they were before the war. Status quo, antebellum. Status quo staying the same, antebellum before the war. So again, it's kind of why this is a very odd and unique event, because there's this big conflict, there's all these reasons for it, but then at the end, nothing happens. But a few things do. In regards to who won this war, definitely not the United States. They didn't win. I guess you could sort of say the British sort of win, but then again, you take in the consideration of Battle of New Orleans, which they soundly lost. But definitely a loser in this conflict are Native Americans. Again, losing out to one of two prominent powers in North America, and they're going to lose further land going forward because of this conflict. So results. What comes out of this conflict besides not a real clear winner? One, national pride. The Battle of New Orleans is going to boost the pride of the United States because they're going to see this clearly one-sided victory, though technically after the signing of the peace treaty, and see that, hey, we can stand up to Great Britain finally. We can show them that, hey, we can be a strong, independent country. Second outcome for this, as I mentioned in the previous slide, is the continuing loss of power for Native Americans. So the conflict that was brewing in the Northwest Territory and then briefly today in the Southwest Mississippi Territory, that's going to be gone. So further dealings of Americans traveling westward for settlement, there's going to be very little Native American resistance going forward. And then third, which we're going to see this play out a lot more in quarter 3 in our next unit 11, is the growth of the industrial might of the United States. Again, we'll pick that more up in our upcoming unit after winter break. And then furthermore, as far as outcomes go, 2 men from this event are going to become national heroes: Andrew Jackson and William Henry Harrison. So with that, that's the conclusion of Lesson 4, Unit 10. So you've got what you need now for the rest of those objective questions. Keeping that in mind, you've got a couple days for our review, 2 days from our review coming up. And that is all. And I will see you all next time.